You are not in control of your mind. 7 invisible environments are draining your strength every day, and you don't even realize it. Carl Jung knew what you call life may just be a prison disguised as normality. You think you choose, but the echo chooses for you. You think you win, but comparison has already stolen your soul. You think you are free, but your own shadow rules your every step. If this cuts deep, sign up now, because no one here will give you comfort. Here you will hear truths that destroy illusions and tear off masks. The question is not whether you are trapped, but in which of these 7 prisons your mind is bleeding right now. And when you find out, it will be too late to pretend you didn't hear. You're not as free as you think. Most of the ideas you defend tooth and nail weren't born within you. They were breathed into you by the invisible chorus that governs your mind. Carl Jung called this collective possession when the individual ceases to exist and the group thinks for them. The labyrinth of echoes has no walls, it has voices. You wake up, turn on the television, open your cell phone, talk to co-workers, and everything repeats like a mantra. The same opinions, the same fears, the same projections, and you, without realizing it, begin to call them your own. The self dies every time you swallow the words you wanted to say, but didn't for fear of rejection. You think this is spirituality, but it's nothing more than an escape. The shadow grows in the silence, because silence here isn't peace, it's disguised censorship. Belonging to the group requires you to cut off pieces of yourself, laugh at the same jokes, hate the same enemies, applaud the same false prophets. This is the price of acceptance, the castration of thought. And when you look in the mirror, you no longer know if the face you see is yours or just a reflection of the masses. In the labyrinth of echoes, you don't need to fight, just obey. It's comfortable, I know. You don't need to think, just repeat. You don't need to harbor doubts, just follow the chorus. But the price is your soul. Every time you remain silent in the face of absurdity, every time you repeat without question, a piece of yourself rots. Carl Jung saw this as the death of individuation, the process that should free you from the masses and bring you face to face with your truth. But you trade individuation for comfort. It's easy to tell if you're already trapped. Just see if you can anticipate every opinion in your social circle. If everyone speaks the same, if everyone reacts the same, if everyone believes they're right, congratulations. You're in a prison without bars. There's no spirituality there, only shadow disguised as light. And the collective shadow is the most dangerous because it doesn't seem dangerous. It looks like friendship, community, unity. But what really exists is fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of thinking alone, fear of facing the emptiness that arises when your voice becomes different from the choir. Want the hard truth? The echo makes you weak. You think you're strong because you're part of a group, but in reality, you're more fragile than ever. You've become predictable. You're no longer a human being, you're a puppet. Jung said, where there's no individuation, there's only unconscious mass. And mass creates nothing, it only repeats. In the labyrinth, the persona grows like a tumor, and the self is suffocated until it becomes a distant memory. You live by reflection, not essence. Every decision you make is tainted by the need for acceptance. You don't live to discover who you are, you live to prove you belong. This is the poison of the echo. It slowly erases your identity, painlessly, until nothing remains but an obedient shadow. And when the echo begins to lose strength, you don't return to yourself, you run to another poison. The next prison awaits you with open arms, the arena of comparison. Because when there's no longer identity, the only way to measure worth is by looking at the yardstick of others, and there the blow is even deeper. In the arena of comparison, you never win. No matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone who achieved it faster, taller, or more beautifully. Carl Jung knew this game is ego manipulation, a dead-end cycle that corrodes the self. You think you're progressing, but you're only feeding the shadow that screams, "I'm not enough." Every victory becomes empty because you measure your life by someone else's yardstick. You got the job, but someone else got the promotion. You bought the car, but someone else bought the house. You loved, but someone else was loved more. The poison of comparison doesn't motivate, it paralyzes. It turns achievements into failures because the criterion is never your desire. It's always the desire of others. You call it healthy competition, but there's nothing healthy about living as a slave to someone else's yardstick. Comparison is the perfect weapon to keep you from feeling whole. While chasing someone else's image, you forget your own. And when you forget your own, you lose the right to be. Want to know the real price of comparison? It's paid in identity. Jung called it inflation and deflation. Sometimes you feel superior, sometimes you feel like trash, but at no point are you just you. Spirituality becomes a showcase, work becomes a stage, relationships become trophies. There's no individuation possible in this space, only constant performance to prove you're not behind. You dress not for what you like, but for what impresses. You frequent places not for their meaning, but for the status they confer. You make choices not for how they resonate with yourself, but for how much they generate envy in those who observe. It's projection in its raw form. You project onto others the measure of your worth and condemn yourself to live in debt to yourself. And when someone around you shines, you don't celebrate. You feel the open wound of your own shadow bleed. It's not victory you seek, it's approval. And approval is never enough because it lasts minutes and vanishes like smoke. Look at yourself. How many times have you nullified your achievements because someone else did it better? How many times have you failed to feel joy because you compared your time with that of others? This is the poison of the arena. You never play for yourself, only for the applause of the invisible audience. Carl Jung knew that nothing kills the spirit faster than chasing images that aren't yours. Individuation requires the courage to step away from this arena and choose your own path, even if it doesn't impress anyone. But courage hurts, and most prefer to continue bleeding in silence. As long as you measure your life by the yardstick of others, you are doomed to always lose, because the yardstick changes, others change, the standard changes, and you remain empty. And when the void tightens, you run to the next mask, the theater of the persona. There, at least, you can pretend to be everything the arena demanded. But the price of pretense is even more brutal. It's forgetting who you really are. In the theater of the persona, you don't live, you perform. Carl Jung knew that the persona is necessary to exist in society. But when the mask becomes the face, the self disappears. Here, every gesture is rehearsed, every word is measured, every smile is calculated. You don't say what you think, you say what they expect to hear. You don't show who you are, you show who will be accepted. And the more they applaud your performance, the further you become from your truth. The shadow grows in the wings, suffocated, waiting for the moment to spill out in the form of anger, depression, or emptiness. You call it maturity, but it's a well-rehearsed lie. You think you're fooling others, but the one being fooled is you. In the theater of the persona, authenticity counts for nothing. Only the role that convinces the audience counts. And with each scene, you lose more than you gain. You lose the memory of who you are. Have you ever found yourself laughing at unfunny jokes, praising ideas you despise, agreeing with opinions that disgust you? This is how the persona creeps in, a small agreement here, another there, until the accumulation becomes a betrayal of oneself. Jung called this identification with the persona, the moment when you no longer know where the actor ends and the human begins. Spirituality has also been hijacked by this theater. Performance gurus sell enlightenment while hiding their own shadows. And you applaud. because you prefer to believe in the comfortable illusion of the stage than face the uncomfortable truth behind the scenes. But deep down, you sense there's something rotten in the applause. Because applause doesn't feed the soul, only the ego. The soul cries out for authenticity, but theater demands obedience. And you pay for the ticket with your life every time you choose the character over your own essence. Do you want to know the cruelest effect of the theater of the persona? It's that after so much pretending, you forget what you truly wanted. Life becomes a continuous play, without intermission, without rehearsal, without backstage. You get used to being seen and stop seeing yourself. It's a silent emptiness that grows even in the spotlight. Carl Jung warned, when the persona dominates, individuation dies. Because individuation requires the courage to bear oneself before oneself, and there is no courage on stage, only performance. And the audience, they don't care about you, only the role you play. A role can be replaced, discarded, erased without mourning. And you, deep down, know this. That's why theater is unbearable, because even when applauded, you feel like you don't exist. Escaping this scene leads to an even more corrosive space, a silence that rots, where there is no mask but also no voice, where what should be peace becomes an absence of life. Not all silence is peace. There is a silence that corrodes, that kills from within, that rots the soul while on the outside everything appears calm. Carl Jung knew that many confuse the absence of conflict with harmony, but there is nothing more dangerous than a family, a relationship, or a community that prides itself on never fighting. This is not love, it is anesthesia. In the silence that rots, no one speaks of what they feel, no one asks for what they need, no one names the pain that cuts inside. And the more time passes, the more the soul learns to swallow its own emotional hunger. You learned from an early age that expressing need was weak, that showing pain was annoying, that asking for affection was selfish, and so you fell silent. But the unconscious doesn't shut up. The shadow begins to scream in dreams, in symptoms, in inexplicable voids. You wake with anxiety, sleep with anguish, but swear you're fine. This is the silence that rots, the one that dresses itself in peace but smells of death. Modern spirituality also feeds on this silence. How many masters and leaders have you heard telling you to transcend pain, don't complain, don't judge? It all sounds nice, but it's just a mask for repression. The result is always the same. You bury your living emotions, and the graveyard grows within you. Carl Jung called this emotional starvation, when the soul starves because the self is never nourished with truth. You can be married, surrounded by friends, participating in groups, and still feel more alone than ever. Because presence without depth is absence in disguise. You look around, everyone's smiling, everyone pretending everything is fine. But behind the smile, there's emptiness. And the cruelest thing about this silence is that it seems normal. You convince yourself that at least we don't fight, but the price of not fighting is never meeting, because real encounter requires friction, vulnerability, and truth, everything that rotting silence prohibits. Want proof that you live in this space? Notice the discomfort you feel when someone asks you what you really need. You freeze because you've learned that need is a crime. Or notice the anxiety that arises when the environment becomes too quiet. Silence should bring rest, but in you it only brings fear. Because deep down you know, if the silence drags on, your soul will begin to scream. Carl Jung said that the unconscious takes its toll when it's not heard. And the toll of silence is heavy. Anxiety, depression, broken relationships, illnesses that seem causeless. All of this is the repressed voice trying to escape. In the rotting silence, there is no peace, there is abandonment. You're not rejected by others, You reject yourself for the sake of appearances, and the more you remain silent, the more you lose yourself. Until one day you realize you no longer know what you feel, and when the silence becomes unbearable, you desperately seek noise. And so, without realizing it, he falls straight into the next prison, the storm of chaos, where excess stimuli replaces the absence of voice, but the price remains the death of the soul. In the storm of chaos, there is no silence, no pause, no space to listen to the self. Carl Jung already knew, those who can't stand emptiness seek any noise to avoid facing their own shadow, and that's exactly what you do. You fill every second with stimuli, news, useless conversations, social media, videos in sequence, loud music, busy schedules. You call it a productive life, but it's just a well-disguised escape. Chaos works like a drug. It offers an immediate sense of movement, but it corrodes your clarity from within. Spirituality becomes a spectacle, not reflection. You consume motivational phrases as if they were anesthetic, but you can't stand 2 minutes of looking inward. And when silence finally arrives, you feel withdrawal, anxiety, discomfort, panic, because deep down you know that if you stay quiet, the shadow will rise. The storm of chaos doesn't give you time to think, and that's precisely what makes it so seductive. Have you ever noticed how exhausted you feel, even on days filled with productivity? This happens because being busy isn't the same as being alive. Carl Jung called this state in which the mind becomes so overwhelmed that it loses the ability to integrate experiences into wisdom, psychic fragmentation. You read 10 books and don't apply anything. You watch dozens of videos and don't change a single behavior. You talk to several people, but you don't remember a single sentence that truly sticks. This is the effect of chaos. You become a compulsive consumer of information, yet incapable of generating awareness. And the cruelest thing is that you pride yourself on it. You show others how you're always active, how you never stop, how you're always up to date. But all of this is just a mask to hide the fear of stopping, because if you stop, the silence will reveal what you've buried. And facing this requires courage you no longer know you have. Do you want to understand why the storm of chaos is so dangerous? Because it trains your body and mind to believe that being overwhelmed is normal. You no longer know how to rest. You no longer know how to be alone. You no longer know how to switch off. Your nervous system lives in a state of alert. Your breath is shallow. Your attention is fragmented. And while you drown in noise, your soul begs for retreat. Carl Jung said that it is in silence that the unconscious speaks, but you have already lost the language of your own psyche. Individuation demands inner space, but you refuse to give it that space. So you settle for living like a machine, programmed to consume and react without ever truly creating. Chaos is not life, it is noise, it is not movement, it is escape. And with each day that you sink into this storm, the further away you become from yourself, until chaos becomes routine and routine becomes a prison. And when you realize you no longer know what you want, you discover that you have unwittingly entered the next cell, the chamber of self-abandonment, where it is not the noise that destroys you, it is the inner silence of those who betray themselves. Self-abandonment doesn't happen all at once. It corrodes silently in small concessions, in yeses said when the soul screamed no. Carl Jung called it loss of self, when you betray yourself to sustain a persona acceptable to others. The chamber of self-abandonment isn't visible, but you feel it in your stomach, in your throat, in the interrupted dreams that never come true. You stay in relationships that have already died, accept jobs that drain your energy, pretend not to notice the shadow begging for attention. With each decision, you tear another piece of your essence, and the cruelest thing is that they applaud you for it. They say you're responsible, strong, generous, but in truth, you're only slowly killing yourself. Because maturity without authenticity is just well-disguised cowardice. You live the life they expect of you, but you've forgotten to live yours. Self-abandonment is spiritual betrayal. You stop listening to the voice of your inner self and begin to obey only external noise. Individuation requires courage to face your own truth, but you choose the easy path, pleasing. The problem is that pleasing comes at a high price. You lose yourself. When someone asks what you really want, you freeze. You no longer know, because you've spent so long denying your own desires that you've become a stranger within your own soul. Carl Jung called this the loss of instinctual connection, a state in which even your body ceases to respond. You no longer feel pleasure in the things you once enjoyed. You no longer have a will of your own. You no longer find purpose. The shadow feeds on this and begins to take over, because where the self doesn't reign, the shadow rules. Self-abandonment isn't just psychological. It transforms into illness, exhaustion, depression, and apathy that consumes the flesh. Want the naked truth? The world celebrates your self-abandonment. You're rewarded when you swallow your desire to sustain the desires of others. You're called an adult when you snuff out your dreams to keep the wheels turning. You're seen as strong when you carry pain you should never have carried alone. But Carl Jung warned, life without individuation is merely empty survival. Self-abandonment is not a virtue, it's slow suicide. You're not living. You're executing invisible orders that have conditioned you since childhood. Every time you say whatever, you dig your own grave deeper. Every time you remain silent before yourself, the self dies a little more. True spirituality will never ask you to deny yourself, but rather to face yourself. And you know you're already exhausted of being everything to everyone and nothing to yourself. And when exhaustion becomes unbearable, there's no alternative but to face the last space, the basement of the shadow, where everything you've rejected awaits you, ready to take revenge or to free yourself. The basement of the shadow is the place where you buried everything you didn't want to see. But nothing that is buried ceases to exist. Carl Jung said, "What you don't bring to consciousness returns as destiny." In the basement, every rejected memory turns to poison, every stifled emotion gains strength, every denied trait begins to grow in the darkness. You think you've buried your anger, but it comes back like an explosion in those who don't deserve it. You think you've forgotten your pain, but it manifests in addictions, compulsions, mysterious illnesses. The shadow doesn't disappear because you pretend it doesn't exist. It feeds precisely on your escape, and the more you run, the more power it gains. In the basement of the shadow, you become hostage to what you rejected. Projections emerge. You hate in others what is secretly yours, and the more you point the finger, the more you lose yourself. The shadow is brutal because it doesn't accept negotiation. Either you face it, or it devours you. Carl Jung knew that the shadow is the key to individuation. Only those who descend into the basement can return whole. But you avoid it. You prefer to remain in the theater of the persona, drown in the storm of chaos, betray yourself in the chamber of self-abandonment, all to avoid opening the basement door. But while you flee, the shadow acts. It sabotages your relationships, makes you repeat familiar patterns, traps you in cycles of failure that seem like destiny but are merely ignored messages. You swear you have nothing to do with your father, yet you act exactly like him. You claim you're not like your mother, but her wounds bleed in you. The shadow doesn't forgive forgetfulness. The unconscious takes its toll. And when you refuse to look, life holds a mirror before you. Sometimes in the form of pain, sometimes in the form of loss. Want the raw truth? The shadow cellar can be your hell or your rebirth. Those who enter it fearfully and try to fight it leave shattered. But those who enter with the courage to look the monster in the eye discover that the monster is also strength. Repressed anger can become creative energy. Stifled pain can become deep compassion. Hidden shame can become the courage to be authentic. Carl Jung called this integration transforming the shadow into an ally instead of an enemy. But the price is high, because facing the shadow requires tearing apart every lie you've told yourself. It's descending to the lowest point of your soul and admitting, I am this too. You can keep running, but the more you run, the more you lose control. The cellar only becomes illuminated when you descend there. And it is in this brutal plunge that true individuation is born. The path that can tear you from all these prisons and return what has always been yours, your own soul. The path of individuation is not a promise of happiness. It is a brutal call to tear apart every illusion you've built. Carl Jung knew that individuating yourself doesn't mean becoming better, but rather becoming whole. This includes the shadow you tried to kill, the persona you mistook for identity, the traits you rejected, and the desires you repressed. Individuation is the symbolic death of everything that isn't you. It's not light, it's not romantic, it's not comfortable. It's a process of crumbling. You need to destroy the echo to hear your own voice. You need to abandon the arena of comparison to find your own ruler. You need to leave the theater of the persona and face your psychic nakedness. You need to break the rotting silence and dare to speak what hurts. You need to weather the storm of chaos until you rediscover the creative void. You need to stop betraying yourself and face the basement of the shadow. Only then does the self begin to emerge. Individuation doesn't happen in theory. It happens in blood, sweat, and daily practice. There's no point reading about spirituality if you don't apply it yourself. Need examples? When everyone agrees, say what you truly think. When you feel envy, acknowledge the shadow instead of denying it. When the noise of chaos dominates, turn everything off and face the painful silence. When you feel the urge to please, ask yourself, does this come from myself or my persona? When you're about to betray your truth, choose the discomfort of authenticity. This is individuation. There is no magic formula, no shortcut. Every choice is a cut that separates who you truly are from who you pretended to be. Carl Jung believed this process is the true meaning of spirituality, because spirituality without individuation is nothing more than an escape, a sacred mask for the same void. The spirit does not flourish where the ego rules. Do you want to know why the path of individuation is so rare? Because it requires the courage to die in life, to die to the image you held, to the roles you played, to the lies you told. It's rebirth, but first, it's mourning. You lose people, you lose places, you lose certainties, but in exchange, you gain the only thing you never had, yourself. Carl Jung called this psychological sovereignty, when you're no longer ruled by the echo, the arena, the persona, the silence, the chaos, the abandonment, the repressed shadow. You become whole, and the whole is free. Not free from pain, but free to go through it without getting lost. Individuation is the map out of these 7 dangerous places, but it's not a map you read. It's a map you live. And the question that remains is brutal. Will you continue wandering in invisible prisons, or will you have the courage to go through the symbolic death that returns you to real life? So tell me, in which of these 7 environments does your mind rot in silence? In the echo that repeats until it kills your voice, in the comparison that turns victory into failure, in the persona that dresses you until you forget who you are, in the silence that corrodes the heart, in the chaos that stifles any thought, in the self-abandonment that betrays your own soul, or in the basement of the shadow that rules your life behind the curtains. You can pretend you don't recognize any of them, but your body already feels the prison, and the price of continuing to deny it is losing yourself every day. If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.